The lost continent of Mu is a mythical land said to have vanished beneath the Pacific Ocean in ancient times. In modern lore, Mu is often compared to Atlantis, another fabled sunken civilization. But unlike the Platonic tale of Atlantis, the story of Mu emerged from 19th and 20th century speculation. Enthusiasts describe Mu as a vast, advanced civilization that was the mother of all later cultures. However, scientists maintain that there is no concrete evidence that Mu ever existed, and they argue it is physically impossible for an entire continent to sink suddenly as these legends claim. The idea of Mu began with a 19th century archaeologist and adventurer named Augustus Le Plongeon. While investigating Maya ruins in Yucatan, Mexico, Le Plongeon claimed he had decoded ancient Mayan texts, including parts of the Popol Vuh, that described a lost land. He believed the Maya civilization was older than those of Egypt or Greece, and had its roots in an even earlier continent. Le Plongeon named this lost land Mu, adopting a term that the French scholar Brasseur de Bourbourg had mistakenly read in a Maya codex, the Troano Codex, as referring to a submerged land. In reality, that translation was erroneous. The word Mu in the codex was a misinterpretation, but Le Plongeon ran with the idea. He identified Mu with Atlantis and hypothesized it had been a large continent in the Atlantic Ocean that was destroyed by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. According to Le Plongeon's theory, when Mu/Atlantis sank, its refugees spread around the world, some settling in the Americas to become the Maya, and others, led by a figure he dubbed Queen Mu, going on to found Ancient. Le Plongeon's dramatic claims were never taken seriously by mainstream scholars, and he died in 1908 without evidence for Mu. Yet his imaginative theory planted the seed of the Mu legend. The baton was soon picked up by another figure, one who would popularize Mu in a new way and relocate it to the Pacific. In the early 20th century, James Churchward, a British inventor and writer, became Mu's most famous proponent. Churchward claimed that he had learned of Mu while serving as a soldier in India in the late 19th century. According to his story, a high-ranking Hindu priest showed him a set of ancient clay tablets stored in a temple. These tablets were written in an unknown ancient language, which the priest taught to Churchward over years of study. By translating the tablets, Churchward believed he had uncovered the history of Mu, the place where man first appeared. Churchward went on to write several books about Mu, beginning with The Lost Continent of Mu, Motherland of Man, 1926, followed by titles like The Children of Mu, 1931, and The Sacred Symbols of Mu, 1933. In these works, he vividly described Mu as a prehistoric super-civilization and the cradle of humankind. He asserted that Mu was located in the Pacific Ocean, not the Atlantic, and was truly enormous, stretching from somewhere north of Hawaii all the way south to the region of Fiji or Easter Island, and from the Marianas in the west across to Mangaia in the east. This would make Mu larger than today's South America in area. Map illustrating James Churchward's concept of Mu's location in the Pacific Ocean. Churchward believed Mu extended roughly from Hawaii to Easter Island, covering much of the Central Pacific. According to Churchward's account, Mu flourished approximately 50,000 years ago until about 12,000 years ago, which in his narrative was the time of its cataclysmic destruction. He claimed this lost continent was home to an advanced and diverse empire called the Nayakal civilization. At its peak, Mu was said to have 64 million inhabitants divided into 10 tribes, living in 7 major cities and colonies on other continents. The people of Mu were technologically and spiritually sophisticated, superior in many respects to our own modern civilization, as Churchward put it. He described Mu as a paradise land of broad plains, rolling hills, mighty rivers, and magnificent gardens. It was in his books nothing less than a prehistoric utopia. Churchward provided great detail about life on Mu as he imagined it. He wrote that the Mu inhabitants had a form of hieroglyphic writing and advanced knowledge of engineering and agriculture. He even suggested they had aircraft or flying machines, a claim sometimes hinted at in fringe literature, though not clearly substantiated in his main books. The society of Mu was portrayed as peaceful and governed by a single government and one religion, worshipping the sun and the forces of nature. Churchward claimed that the queen and king of Mu were known as Ra and Ramu, a possible origin of the word Ra for sun gods in Egypt and other cultures. In his view, Mu's people were the ancestors or teachers of later civilizations across the world. One of the most dramatic elements of Churchward's tale is the fall of Mu. He asserted that around 12,000 years ago, Mu was obliterated in a sudden catastrophe in almost a single night. The cause, he wrote, was a series of massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions of unparalleled scale. Churchward theorized that underground chambers filled with explosive gas deep beneath Mu detonated, fracturing the land. The entire continent broke apart and sank violently into a fiery abyss of the earth, which was then covered over by the waters of the Pacific. In his dramatic prose, he described the land disappearing during one night amidst earthquakes, with the ocean rushing in to swallow Mu and all its inhabitants. Supposedly, 64 million people perished in this disaster, an almost unimaginable death toll, which underscores the epic scale of Churchward's legend. A few people, however, survived by escaping in ships or boats, according to the myth. These survivors became the ancestors of subsequent civilizations. Churchward maintained that Mu's refugees spread to all corners of the world after the destruction. He particularly pointed to ancient Egypt, Central America, the Maya, India, and other old cultures as colonies or successor civilizations founded by people from Mu. In his books, he argued that Mu was truly the motherland of man, the original home of humanity, and that all great ancient cultures, from Egyptian to Mesoamerican to Mesopotamian, were descended from Mu. This was his explanation for why distant societies share certain symbols and myths. For example, Churchward noted the prevalence of sun worship and sun symbols in many ancient religions. He believed this was a legacy of Mu's sun-centered religion. He also claimed the word for sun in Rapa Nui language, Eastern Polynesia, Ra, and the Egyptian sun, god Ra, were not a coincidence, but evidence of a common origin in Mu. Restored Moai statue with a pukau topknot hat on Easter Island. James Churchward claimed the giant Moai statues of Easter Island were remnants of Mu's civilization. For example, he interpreted the red stone pukau hats as symbols of the sun, and said they were quarried to be shipped across Mu. As part of his evidence, Churchward pointed to mysterious monuments and symbols around the world. He famously linked the Moai statues of Easter Island to Mu. The Moai, massive stone heads carved by the indigenous Rapa Nui, sometimes have cylindrical red stone hats, known as pukau. Churchward asserted that these hats represented the sun, and that the statues and their platforms, ahu, were part of an unfinished construction project. In his words, they were awaiting shipment to build temples on Mu. This was not true, but it was his interpretation. He cited similarities in art and architecture, megalithic stone constructions, pyramids, and certain motifs across Egypt, the Americas, Polynesia, and Asia as proof that all had a common source in Mu. Churchward also referenced alleged ancient documents to support his claims. He claimed that one Maya document, often called the Troano manuscript, part of the Madrid Codex, described the cataclysm that sank Mu. In his book, he provided a dramatic translated passage, though mainstream Mayanists consider this translation bogus, that speaks of a land sinking amid earthquakes, with statements like, "The land of Mu was sacrificed. Mu sank with 64 million inhabitants." Another supposed source was what Churchward called the Lhasa record, an inscription from Tibet, which he said also recounted the doom of Mu in flowery language, mentioning, "The star of Baal fell, 7 cities with their golden gates were swallowed by the depths in a great cataclysm." These dramatic narratives certainly enriched Churchward's books, but their authenticity is unverified and heavily disputed by experts. Scholars note that no such detailed records of Mu exist in genuine ancient texts, and they consider Churchward's translations to be imaginative fiction or misinterpretation. In summary, James Churchward's version of Mu was a comprehensive lost civilization myth. It combined elements of biblical floods, Atlantis-like cataclysm, and diffusionist ideas, the notion that ancient cultures all stem from a single source. His books were quite popular in their time and have had a lasting influence on alternative history and New Age lore about lost continents. Through Churchward, Mu became a staple topic in the fringe literature of the 20th century. While Churchward was the main popularizer of Mu, he was not the only one to imagine lost continents in that era. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were rife with speculative theories about ancient vanished lands, partly because modern geology, like plate tectonics, hadn't yet fully debunked these ideas. A few related concepts and contributors include John Newbrough's Pan. In 1882, American mystic John Newbrough published Ospi, a new Bible, a spiritualist text which included a map of the world before the Great Flood. On this map, he showed a large landmass in the Pacific Ocean called Pan. Pan, in Newbrough's story, supposedly sank about 24,000 years ago, long before recorded history. Later writers noticed the similarity to Mu, and sometimes equated Pan with Mu as the same hypothetical Pacific continent. Newbrough even prophesied that this sunken land would one day rise again and be repopulated according to his cosmology, a claim not taken seriously outside of occult circles. Louis Jacoliot's Rutas. Louis Jacoliot was a French writer and occultist who in 1874 wrote about a lost land called Rutas. He based this on ancient Sanskrit sources that described a sunken land, which earlier interpretations placed in the Indian Ocean. However, Jacoliot relocated this lost land to the Pacific and linked it to the Atlantis myth in his book Histoire des Vierges, 1874, and Occult Science in India, 1875. Essentially, Rutas was another proto-Mu idea, a drowned civilization in the Pacific that Jacoliot speculated about before Churchward. Jacoliot's writings blended occult ideas with pseudo-historical claims and likely influenced later occultists. Lemuria and Theosophy. It's important to note that the concept of a lost land in the Indian or Pacific Ocean also appeared in scientific speculation and the occult tradition under the name Lemuria. In the 1860s, some scientists hypothesized a lost continent, Lemuria, in the Indian Ocean to explain the distribution of lemur fossils, a notion later rendered obsolete by continental drift theory. The idea of Lemuria was picked up by Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical movement in the late 19th century. Blavatsky's theosophy taught of successive ancient root races of humanity, and one of these races supposedly lived on Lemuria, a vast primordial continent that sank. While Blavatsky did not explicitly mention Mu, her writings about lost continents created a popular fascination with the idea of prehistoric advanced civilizations. This prepared the ground, so to speak, for Churchward's Mu. Later occult authors sometimes conflated Mu with Lemuria, or considered them part of the same narrative of ancient lost worlds. For example, American psychic Edgar Cayce, 1877 to 1945, spoke in his trance readings about both Atlantis and a Pacific continent, often calling it Lemuria or Mu interchangeably. Cayce claimed these were places where early human souls incarnated and developed psychic powers, and he prophesied remnants of these lands would be discovered in the 1960s. Such ideas kept the Mu-Lemuria legend alive in mid-20th century metaphysical circles. Uyghur Empire and other pseudo-historical claims. Churchward's imagination was not confined to the Pacific. In his books, he also described an ancient advanced colony of Mu in Central Asia, which he called the Uyghur Empire, not to be confused with the real Uyghur people. He alleged this empire in the Gobi Desert was a high civilization contemporaneous with mumichtastone.blogspot.com. Like many fringe authors of his time, he wove an elaborate world history connecting Mu to practically all ancient peoples. These claims are considered pseudoscience by historians, but they show how expansive the Mu mythos became in the early 20th century fringe literature. In popular culture, the idea of Mu also made appearances. For instance, H.P. Lovecraft and other fantasy writers adopted Mu as a mysterious, lost land in their fiction. In Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, Mu is referenced as a sunken kingdom in some stories, adding to its aura of mystery. This cultural afterlife of Mu in novels, comics, and films further cemented its place as a legendary lost world, akin to Atlantis or Shangri-La in the public imagination. Even long after Churchward, the legend of Mu continues to intrigue. Throughout the 20th century and into the 21st, various authors and even a few scientists or national figures have revisited the idea of a lost Pacific continent. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's Curiosity, 1930s. A surprising footnote in history is that Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, showed interest in the idea of Mu. In the 1930s, Ataturk had translations of Churchward's books made for his personal study. He was curious whether the Turks might trace their origin to an ancient civilization like Mu. There was even a proposal by one of his linguists, Tahsin Mayatepek, to set up a Mu research department in Turkey. However, Ataturk's interest remained speculative, and he never fully endorsed the Mu theory. It appears he treated it as a fascinating hypothesis worth examining, but not something to be woven into serious scholarship. After Ataturk's death, this brief official interest in Mu faded, but it demonstrates how the legend reached even political leaders in the early 20th century. Underwater ruins and Yonaguni. In recent decades, one of the most cited evidences for Mu by enthusiasts are certain underwater structures found in the Pacific. A notable example is the Yonaguni monument near Yonaguni Island, the southwestern tip of Japan. Discovered in the 1980s, the Yonaguni Formation is a submerged rock terrace that has strikingly geometric features. It looks like stepped platforms and straight walls underwater. Some researchers, such as geologist Masaki Kimura, have hypothesized that these could be the ruins of an ancient civilization, potentially Mu. Kimura suggested that an ancient people built structures there over 10,000 years ago, before rising sea levels drowned them. This idea caught popular attention, and sensational documentaries have labeled Yonaguni as a Japanese Atlantis. In Mu lore, Yonaguni is sometimes pointed to as a remnant of the lost Pacific continent. However, most geologists and archaeologists conclude that Yonaguni's features are natural, likely carved by ocean currents and fracturing of sandstone, not human-made. No definitively human carvings or artifacts have been found attached to the site. The consensus is that while it's an interesting rock formation, it's not proof of Mu, yet the visual appeal of Yonaguni keeps it in the conversation. Scuba diver exploring the Yonaguni Monument underwater rock formation near Japan. Some believe these submerged stepped structures are the ruins of Mu, but geological studies indicate they are natural formations. The mystery of Yonaguni fuels modern interest in lost continents. Nan Madol and Pacific megaliths. Aside from Yonaguni, enthusiasts sometimes cite other Pacific mysteries. Nan Madol, an ancient city built on islets in Micronesia, Pohnpei Island, features a complex of canals and over 90 man-made islets with megalithic stone walls. Its purpose and the methods used to move such massive basalt stones, weighing many tons, remain partially enigmatic. Some have whimsically connected Nan Madol to Mu, suggesting it might have been built by Mu's people or be a surviving part of that civilization. There is, however, a known local history for Nan Madol, built by the Sudler dynasty around 1200 to 1500 CE, so archaeologists don't invoke lost continents to explain it. Similarly, the monumental moai of Easter Island, which Churchward himself referenced, have been a source of speculation. How did a small, isolated population carve and move such giant statues? In truth, research has provided many answers. The Rapa Nui had ingenious methods of carving and transporting the moai using limited resources. The island's history has been extensively studied, showing it was settled by Polynesians around 300 CE, and the statues were made in the last 800 to 900 years, much later than the time Mu supposedly sank. Nonetheless, in the popular imagination, Sites like Easter Island often get tied into the Mu legend, under the notion that maybe these cultures had help from an earlier civilization. Evidence in language and culture. Believers in Mu sometimes comb through ancient myths and languages for hints of a sunken land. For instance, they point out that many cultures have a flood myth, a great deluge, Mesoamerican stories, the Bible's Noah story, etc., and suggest these are all folk memories of Mu's destruction. They also note supposed linguistic coincidences, like the syllable mu or mua appearing in Polynesian place names or in words like mu, a term from Easter Island folklore. Mainstream scholars consider these connections to be either coincidences or the result of later influence. Common flood myths, for example, are explained by the fact that many early societies experienced flooding events or have psychological archetypes of cleansing floods, rather than a single shared historical event. Likewise, similar words in different languages are often just false cognates unless a clear linguistic lineage is demonstrated. Modern archaeologists and linguists have not found any verifiable trace of Mu in ancient records. No mention in Egyptian papyri, no mention in Mayan inscriptions beyond the misread Troano Codex. Nothing in Polynesian oral history that unambiguously points to a lost continent. The evidence is instead typically cherry-picked from myths and speculative interpretations. It's easy to see why the Mu legend endures in popular culture. The idea of an advanced mother civilization has an intrinsic appeal, especially when one notices tantalizing puzzles like pyramids popping up in Egypt and Mesoamerica, or the sheer ingenuity of sites like Machu Picchu, Göbekli Tepe, or Pohnpei. As one writer noted, many people find mainstream explanations unsatisfying and prefer the romantic notion of a great ancestral continent. To the imagination, Mu offers a single grand answer to the question of how ancient peoples accomplished impressive feats. They all inherited knowledge from Mu. This grand narrative is compelling in books, TV shows, and YouTube videos. However, science approaches these claims with skepticism and demands solid evidence, which leads us to the critical examination of Mu's plausibility. From the perspective of geology and archaeology, the existence of Mu as described by Churchward or others is overwhelmingly rejected. Over the last century, numerous findings in earth science and human history have provided natural explanations that leave little room for a vanished Pacific continent in the recent geologic past. Here are the major counterarguments, as concluded by experts. Plate tectonics, continents, don't sink. Modern geology has shown that the Earth's crust is divided into tectonic plates. Continents consist of lighter rock, continental crust, that floats on denser material. A continent cannot simply plummet into the ocean and vanish in a short time span. It's not physically possible given buoyancy and mass balance. If a landmass the size of Mu had broken apart approximately 12,000 years ago, huge remnants of continental crust, seal rock, would still be present on the ocean floor. But extensive oceanographic mapping shows no sunken continent in the Pacific. The Pacific Basin is mostly deep oceanic crust, and islands there are volcanic seamounts, not tips of a submerged continent. While small islands can sink or be eroded, and local landmasses can submerge due to rising seas, a continent's worth of land cannot disappear without trace. The only lost continents we know of, like Zealandia or Mauritius, sank tens of millions of years ago due to plate movements, and they were fragments of ancient supercontinents. Importantly, they were long gone before humans. For example, Zealandia submerged gradually about 80 million years ago and lies deep under the ocean. It was never home to humans. So geology rules out a large mid-Pacific continent vanishing in late prehistoric times. Geologic time scales versus human time. The Mu story requires a rapid destruction, in one night in Churchward's account. But any reconfiguration of continents happens on geological timescales, millions of years. The breakup of supercontinent Pangaea, for instance, took tens of millions of years, not overnight convulsions. Sure, catastrophic events do occur, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, but they don't cause entire continents to sink. Even a supervolcano can't make a continent vanish. At most, it can cause regional devastation. No known geologic mechanism could cause the entire Pacific crust to collapse suddenly, as described earthquakes can submerge patches of land or cause coastal flooding, but not hide a continent of thousands of miles. The Earth simply doesn't work that way, and there's no evidence in ocean sediment or core samples of such a recent mega-collapse. No traces on the seafloor. If Mu existed, we would expect to find geological and topographical evidence under the Pacific. Submerged plateaus, continental rock signatures, etc. None have been found. The Pacific Ocean floor has been studied, through drilling, sonar mapping, etc., and it's composed of basaltic oceanic crust, not old continental granite, except for known features like Zealandia near New Zealand. There is no massive debris field of continental crust in the Pacific that would correspond to a sunken Mu. The closest things are Micronesia's sunken volcanic islands, and perhaps old submerged islands, atolls, etc., which are far too small and of the wrong rock type. In short, the geology doesn't show anything like a continent that was above water in late Quaternary times and then disappeared. Human evolution and archaeology. From the archaeological standpoint, the timeline and claims of Mu conflict with everything we know about human prehistory. Churchward claimed Mu's civilization existed 50,000 to 12,000 years ago with advanced technology. But according to archaeological evidence, humans 50,000 years ago were hunter-gatherers, and no evidence of large cities or advanced engineering exists from that time. The earliest known settlements or monumental architecture, like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, date to around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, and those were created by humans who had no metal tools or writing, much less aircraft or high science. If 64 million people had existed in one place and colonized the world, they would have left extensive traces, millions of skeletons, countless artifacts, etc. No such traces have been found in the Pacific Islands or anywhere that would indicate a vanished super-civilization. On the contrary, archaeology indicates that places like Polynesia were settled from west to east by seafaring Austronesian peoples starting around 3000 to 1000 BCE, not by some east-to-west movement from a sunken continent. New World civilizations, Maya, etc., show evidence of development in situ from hunter-gatherer ancestors over millennia, with no sudden influx of outsiders around 10,000 years ago bringing high technology. Their languages, skeletal remains, and tools all point to indigenous development, independent development of cultures. Scholars have shown that similarities like pyramids or flood myths can arise independently. Pyramids in Egypt and Mesoamerica, for example, were built almost 2,500 years apart and for different purposes. The Egyptian pyramids were tombs, while Mesoamerican pyramids were temples. The concept of building big structures is not evidence of shared origin. Human societies often converge on similar solutions, stacking stones or mud brick to make a tall structure, because of common physics and needs. Likewise, flood myths are present in many cultures' folklore, but that doesn't mean they all refer to one single flood. After the Ice Age, sea levels rose and many groups worldwide experienced floods, e.g., the Black Sea Deluge, flooding of coastal plains, etc., which likely inspired such myths independently. There's also a psychological aspect. Floods make for powerful storytelling about divine punishment or renewal. In short, anthropologists find that cultural parallels do not require a lost continent to explain them. Genetic studies reinforce this. DNA evidence shows that Native Americans share genetics with East Asians from Ice Age migrations over Beringia. Polynesians share ancestry with Southeast Asians, etc., and there is no genetic marker of a ubiquitous ancient Mu population spreading globally. If a single source population had globally dispersed as recently as 12,000 years ago, we would expect more homogeneous genetic links across continents than we see instead. Genetic patterns align with migrations we already know from archaeology. Known lost lands are smaller scale. Geologists do recognize that sea levels were lower during the last ice age, 20,000 years ago. Large areas that are now under shallow seas were once dry land. For example, the Sunda Shelf, connecting Southeast Asia to Indonesia, Beringia, connecting Siberia to Alaska, and Doggerland in the North Sea. As the ice caps melted, these areas flooded, but these were not continents, just coastal plains. Importantly, their submergence was gradual, over centuries, and we have evidence of the process. For instance, marine sediment over what was once land, remains of drowned forests, etc. Some human settlements or artifacts have indeed been found on these now submerged lands, e.g. prehistoric tools on the North Sea floor, which demonstrates how such real lost lands leave traces. By contrast, Mu, as envisioned, a mid-ocean continent with advanced cities, has left no traces. Additionally, the scale is off. Mu was said to be the size of a continent, whereas the real flooded areas were much smaller regions adjacent to existing continents. Occasionally, headlines speak of a lost continent, like the 2013 discovery of submerged crust off Brazil, nicknamed the Brazilian Atlantis. But that crust sank around 100 million years ago when the Atlantic was opening. It has nothing to do with human history, and it was never a place of cities. In summary, modern science finds no support for Mu. Geologists state plainly that Mu, like Atlantis, has no factual basis and is physically impossible. As described, archaeologists find that human civilization has multiple independent points of origin, the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, etc., none of which requires a lost Pacific parent civilization. The timeline of human development, as constructed from thousands of archaeological sites, simply doesn't have a gap where an advanced 50,000-year-old Pacific civilization would fit. All evidence indicates that the Pacific Islands were populated by seafarers relatively late in history, and the Americas by migrants from Asia, with no known influence from a Pacific continent. Finally, it's worth noting that William Niven's tablets, which Churchward heavily cited, remain a mystery or perhaps a myth. Niven was a real archaeologist who dug in Mexico and found many artifacts in the 1920s. He reportedly uncovered strange inscribed stones in Mexico, which Churchward believed were records from Mu. However, no verified examples of those inscribed tablets survive. Some say Niven reburied them, or that they were never properly documented. This means one of the pillars of Churchward's evidence is not verifiable. Everything we know today suggests that Mu belongs to the realm of legend and pseudoscience, not real history. The story of Mu is a fascinating blend of historical speculation, imaginative fiction, and pseudoscientific conjecture. What started with Augustus Le Plongeon's misreading of a Maya text evolved into James Churchward's rich tale of a Pacific super-civilization. Over the years, the legend has been embellished by occult writers, adventure fiction, and fringe theorists into a full-fledged modern myth. Mu represents a kind of yearning, a hope that perhaps an advanced mother culture once existed, explaining the mysteries of antiquity. It makes for great storytelling and creative thought experiments, envisioning a tropical paradise of 64 million souls, brimming with knowledge, tragically lost to the sea. However, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and in the case of Mu, the evidence just isn't there. The counter-arguments from geology and archaeology are strong. Continents don't vanish in the span of a night, and no trace of Mu's supposed civilization has been found by researchers in the Pacific or elsewhere. The wonders of the ancient world, pyramids, statues, megaliths, can be understood through the ingenuity of the people who actually built them, without invoking a lost continent. That said, the legend of Mu continues to captivate the public. It survives in books, documentaries, and online videos that speculate about what if it were true. Such stories, while not supported by science, remind us of the human love for mystery and our desire to connect the dots of the past. Investigating Mu from a critical perspective also highlights how knowledge progresses. Early theories like lost continents gave way to robust scientific explanations, plate tectonics, evolution of culture, as our understanding improved. In the end, Mu is a cautionary tale, a reminder of how easily fact and fantasy can blend when evidence is scarce. The allure of Mu will likely endure in our imaginations, but as of now it remains firmly a myth, a sunken land of dreams rather than reality. The real history of humanity, as far as science can tell, is no less awe-inspiring. Our ancestors peopled the islands and continents through exploration and innovation without the guiding hand of a lost motherland. And yet, the tale of Mu adds a layer of wonder, a what-if scenario, that continues to inspire storytellers and explorers of ideas. Whether viewed as a cautionary myth or a fun piece of pseudo-history, Mu holds a unique place in the tapestry of modern legends about Earth's past. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more fascinating stories, and ring the bell so you never miss a new episode from Cipher History. Stay curious.